Good afternoon, everyone. All right, it looks like we can get started as more and more people join us. Welcome to Blood Sugar and Weight Loss, What's the Connection? This program is brought to you by Northern Westchester Hospital's Center for Healthy Living, featuring the Center for Weight Management and Diabetes Education Program, all part of Northwell Health. My name is Amy Rosenfeld, and I am a Community Outreach Program Manager for Northern Westchester Hospital.
In the Zoom room, I have invited two clinicians in with me today.
I have Dr. Kieran Feely, who is the Director for Center for Weight Management at Northwell Health. Welcome, Dr. Feely. As well as fellow dietitian Karen Hunnicky, who is registered dietitian and diabetes educator for the Center for Weight Management and Diabetes Education Program at Northwell Health. So welcome to you both. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So today we're going to be discussing the connection between prediabetes and diabetes and weight loss, and learning about controlling blood sugar and how that can help lead to successful weight loss and vice versa. At the end of the presentation, I'm going to be demonstrating a healthy recipe to help you get started on some healthy ways to control your blood sugar in your meals. And that recipe you should have received in your email box, but if for any reason you didn't, please put your email in the chat or at the survey at the end of the program, and I'm happy to send it to you. I'm going to be preparing turkey pepper nachos. So fun little twist on a classic. Some business. As time permits at the end of the program, we'll try to take as many questions as possible, some of your pre-submitted questions and some of your questions that you're putting in the chat and the Q&A function. If at any time during the presentation, if you're interested in booking an appointment with the Center for Weight Management or with either of these clinicians, please private message us using the chat function or put your contact information in the survey at the end, and we'll be sure to reach out to you to do so. And all right, we're ready to get started. So Dr. Feely, the first question is for you. What's the connection between prediabetes, type 2 diabetes, and weight gain or being overweight?
Sure. I would say that the primary connection between obesity and diabetes is that they're very closely related because they result from the same underlying process, which is really insulin resistance. So for those who aren't familiar, insulin is a hormone produced by your pancreas that stores nutrients when they enter your bloodstream after a meal, such as glucose, and puts them into body tissue, such as primarily acts on your muscle cells, your liver cells, and your fat cells, where it stores these away so that you can use them later. So insulin resistance is a process by which the muscle tissue and the liver tissue don't stop responding as well to your insulin that you naturally make. And this kind of requires your pancreas to make more insulin to control your blood sugar levels. And this process can start when body stores of glucose and fat are too high. So one way of thinking of it is kind of like your muscle cells and your liver cells and your fat cells are all saying, hey, we're full, we don't want it. They start resisting your hormone, and your hormone, your pancreas says, well, too bad, because it can't stay in the blood and it makes more insulin. Where this relates to weight gain and diabetes is that insulin is a very anabolic hormone, and in the absence of a lot of physical activity, it leads to body fat storage. So in a simplistic sense, excess body fat, poor diet, insufficient physical activity cause insulin resistance that promotes storage of more fat because of higher insulin levels. Then that causes more insulin resistance, and ultimately leading towards a state where you may not be able to fully control your blood sugars anymore. So excess weight and diabetes are very closely related in this way.
Fascinating. Thank you for that explanation. And what are the health risks associated with uncontrolled or undiagnosed prediabetes or type 2 diabetes?
Sure. So type 2 diabetes, as I was saying, is kind of an improper response to your body's hormone insulin, and that results in chronically elevated levels of glucose in the blood, amongst other things. So, and prediabetes is thought of as a state in which blood glucose levels are chronically elevated above the normal range, but not in a diabetes range yet. So health risks of having chronically elevated blood sugar are mostly attributed to damage that high level of blood sugar causes to the inner lining of all your blood vessels. And so, when those blood sugars affect the lining of the small blood vessels, it affects how nutrients and blood flow goes through that organ, and it ultimately can damage that organ. So some organs like your retina of your eye, your kidney, your nerves, your skin, when healing, they really depend on these small blood vessels functioning well. And when they get damaged from the high blood sugar, it can result in chronic kidney disease, diabetic retinopathy of the eye, poor wound healing from the skin, and neuropathy for those reasons. And it also can damage the large blood vessels as well, and that can lead towards heart attacks, strokes, and peripheral vascular disease that can result in amputations and things. So as you can see, through affecting blood vessels in the body, it really has a lot of effects.
Wow. So it really is linked with a lot of different medical conditions, and therefore really important to know your state, to know if you're pre-diabetic or if you are type 2 diabetic, to get it under control.
Yeah.
Really interesting.
I'll quickly add that, low-grade damage to the blood vessels may actually be occurring starting in the pre-diabetic state. So even though you don't have diabetes, the process may be starting. So that's why it's really important to try and address it at that stage or before, rather than waiting until you have been diagnosed with diabetes.
Really important to know. And I see there's a question in the chat. Maybe you could just quickly clarify the difference between a blood glucose level, perhaps like a fasting glucose level that your doctor might be doing, and a hemoglobin A1C test, which people might be getting at their doctors as well.
Yes, that's a good question. So a blood glucose level just indicates what your blood sugar is at that moment. And we often use the fasting blood glucose level because if you're measuring it after a meal, there's a lot of other factors that affect that, like what you ate, how much, everything else. But fasting, it gives an idea of how well you're controlling your blood sugar. A1C is a test that measures, essentially tells you what your average blood sugar level has been over the past 3 to 4 months. And so it gives a general idea of your overall blood sugar control, not necessarily that exact moment, but both can be useful in slightly different ways.
Okay, like an average. Is that what you, like an average of 3 months?
Exactly. It signifies the average of your blood sugar over about 3 to 4 months.
Okay, excellent. Really good to know. So Karen, I'm going to turn it over to you, but before we do that, I'm going to launch a poll, everybody. A little box is going to pop up on your screen. We want to see how much maybe you know the answer to the question and have a little fun with you. So I'm going to launch this first question here. All right. So what is the best way to prevent or reduce your risk for diabetes from progressing to type 2 diabetes? If overweight, lose at least 7 to 10 pounds of weight. Everybody's answering. If overweight, lose at least 7 to 10% of your body weight. Add 150 minutes of cardio and 2 days of strength training per week. All of the above, or just B and C only? Let's see what everybody says, Karen. Give everyone just a second to respond. All right. All right, let's see what everybody says. Okay, so Karen, the majority of people said all of the above. What's the answer?
It is B and C, really, because we really want to look at percentage is really what we've kind of, what the research and stuff has looked at. It's more attainable if sometimes versus just a set, number of, set poundage to lose, and people are at different weights and stuff. So, losing 10 pounds means a lot, is very different if you're, 30 pounds overweight or 100 pounds overweight. So a percentage is, and sometimes it's just a little bit easier to kind of like wrap your head around that. And it shows amazing like benefits that, the main things you want to be doing is you want to have a healthy diet. You want to be looking at the quality of the food that you're eating. You want, we know things like if you, increase like your fiber, it's, it's a lower incidence of like type 2 diabetes, or, they're just little things that you want to look at that quality, but you also want to really look at weight loss. The goal for if you have pre-diabetes is a 7 to 10% weight loss. And to add that exercise, that, that 150 minutes of that of cardio, like, at least a very brisk walking, and preferably with, at least 2 days of the strength training in there. We know that it works, and the studies have shown it can work. Putting those lifestyle things together is even more effective than adding like a medication kind of on its own. So lifestyle is really where we want to focus.
Wow. So you really can help to prevent or delay the progression.
Yes.
There was a question that was submitted, if you can reverse it as well. I don't know if you want to address that now.
That is, so the pre-diabetes, it's very, in anything earlier in the stage, like when it comes, I would not want to say reverse type 2 diabetes. At that point, you usually have quite a bit, sometimes of like the beta cell damage and whatnot, and you have a chronic disease. But sometimes people like to use the word like remission, maybe get your blood glucose levels back into a normal or even like pre-diabetic range without the use of medication. And that achieving that is easier when you are earlier on in the disease process. So pre-diabetes, or maybe your first few years of having diabetes, but that's because it has to do more with insulin, maybe like resistance versus like not being able to, versus an insulin deficiency which might happen with like the cell damage there. So
okay. Okay, but it's actually really comforting to know, and I'm sure comforting for a lot of people to hear, that you can prevent or delay, and perhaps not even through medication, that you're recommending that lifestyle change is in fact research-based to be more effective.
For pre-diabetes, like especially, yes, yeah. Like a lot that can be done. And even if you are at a healthy weight, you still want to be looking at your diet and your exercise, so they independently can help with delaying that progression.
Okay, especially you said the building lean body mass, so weight resistance training, even if you're at a healthy weight. That's interesting.
And the cardio, both of them, they help. Yeah, even if they've shown in studies that even if you don't reach that 7% weight loss goal, if you do reach the physical activity goal, at least 150 like minutes, that's 5 days a week of 30 minutes, they had a 44% reduction in type 2 incidence. And so we want, that we really want to emphasize both. Exercise.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And how exactly, maybe you can explain a little bit how weight loss does affect your blood sugar, like how exactly that works?
Yeah, that, it has to, what Dr. Feely kind of like talked about in the beginning, with that connection between like weight, obviously, and these diseases and whatnot. And when you do have weight loss, a lot of what we get is you start to lose some of that visceral fat, that abdominal like kind of fat there, and some of the ectopic fat, so that's fat buildup. That also goes on your liver and pancreas, like Dr. Feely was saying, when your body's like, we have so much fat already, your body starts to place it other places. And when it's here, when it's around deep in your organs and abdominal, you have increased insulin resistance, decreased insulin sensitivity, higher risk of type 2 diabetes, more inflammatory markers. And when you have the fat sitting on like your liver and your pancreas, you're going to have disruptions in the way your body is handling insulin and glucose regulation. So the weight loss, I think, perhaps Dr. Feely then can, chime in more, but it has a lot to do with like getting down a lot of that body fat, which is disrupting your body's ability to effectively manage its blood sugar.
That's great. That's really, really interesting. Dr. Feely, perhaps you could comment on recent research that also talks about weight gain and how it's affected by the quality of foods that you eat versus just the quantity, because there's a lot of new research coming out about this. Very interesting.
Sure. So I believe the two models you're referring to are the traditional energy balance model, and there's a carbohydrate insulin model that has been a focus recently. So the energy balance model is the traditional model built on decades of research and kind of integrates our understanding of obesity and around the concept that it's caused by an imbalance of calories consumed and calories burned. So weight loss is achieved through an energy deficit, and the type of calorie you're getting is less important as long as there is a deficit compared to what you're burning. And attributes most of the causes of obesity being so prevalent to highly processed foods that are energy dense, easily accessible with minimal effort, a rise in more sedentary jobs and lifestyles. And so that's kind of what the energy balance model focuses on. The carbohydrate insulin model is I just lost for a second. Sorry, is kind of a different model that challenges the notion that calories from different macronutrients affect the body weight equally. So rather than viewing weight changes as the result of just how much we eat, it sort of reframes the equation and saying that how much we eat is influenced by hormones such as insulin that affect cravings and appetite, and that may be affected by what macronutrients we eat. So eating a certain way is affecting our appetite and therefore affecting our behavior and so on, and then affecting our weight. So the general focus seems to be on glycemic load, or the degree to which the food increases blood sugar levels after eating, and consuming a high glycemic load or a lot of food that's increasing your blood sugar rapidly elicits this hormone response that ultimately causes lower availability of blood sugar and nutrients, and then more hunger and increasing appetite and less energy expenditure. So these theories sound very different. I actually see them in some ways as framing similar concepts differently. For example, the carbohydrate insulin model is not really saying that calories don't matter. It's and that you won't gain weight with excess calories. It's really saying that what your hormonal environment will actually affect how many calories you're eating and how many you're burning. So that is kind of a different way of viewing the problem and how to correct it. Let's see, I think both theories are useful. Both models are useful. I think this newer model, in the sense that it emphasized the source of calories, that is important, because that different foods can affect appetite and weight distribution differently. And it focuses a little less on willpower and things like that, and more on focusing on things that affect appetite and cravings to have better control of your intake. At the same time, highly processed and high glycemic foods, while they can negatively affect weight gain, I kind of caution that way of thinking can maybe oversimplify diet and weight loss. Since I said the underlying issue with obesity and diabetes is this insulin resistance, is that your body is not really responding to the insulin properly. So for example, if you eat a potato, this may cause a spike in your blood sugar level, and that doesn't mean that a potato is causing diabetes. It means that your body can't handle a potato because of the insulin resistance and diabetes. So this model, I think, can cause a focus too much sometimes on just that carbohydrates are not good and anything that's not carbohydrate is helpful. But it is helpful in potentially addressing aspects that influence appetite. I'll just kind of give one more example to kind of say what I'm saying. I mean, if you look at table sugar, and that actually has a much lower glycemic index than a potato or a banana, and it's pure table sugar, and something like a cake with fat in it will be even lower. That's because table sugar is sucrose. It's not the same as what we measure in our blood glucose. Half of that is something called fructose. I'm getting a little technical, I know, but it's basically half of the sugar in that table sugar is not influencing your blood sugar levels directly and immediately. It's not influencing your insulin directly and immediately. But that fructose and table sugar causes much more insulin resistance in the long term. And so we know that eating lots and lots of table sugar is going to be much worse than eating potato or banana in terms of the progression of your diabetes and your weight. And other factors influence that is insulin sensitivity as well. Saturated fats can, certain protein sources, and obviously our activity level and just the overall number of calories does influence insulin resistance. So I would say it is helpful as a model, but it can maybe oversimplify the issue. So
Yeah. And it's probably a little bit of individuality here, like you were alluding to before, but I think it is helpful to hear about new research that's saying it isn't simply about calories in, calories out for every person, that there's a little bit more involved here. And I know, Karen, we're going to talk a lot about your recommendations for food choices and applying to that model. But thank you, Dr. Feely. That was a great explanation. Dr. Feely, also, there were some questions coming through in the chat about, appropriate weight level or how you can associate that. Maybe you can explain a little bit about BMI and what exactly that is. And answer the question, do you need to achieve a normal, quote unquote, BMI to be healthy, or is it just about percentage of weight reduction?
Sure. So BMI is basically an equation that has two inputs. It's your weight and your height. And so estimating what an appropriate weight is for an appropriate height. It's not a perfect tool. I mean, you can be a muscular athlete and have a higher BMI than a sedentary individual with lots of fat and not much muscle. Just the structure of your body. I mean, there are differences. So it's not a perfect tool. It is a good general kind of screening tool to get an idea of is there a problem or not. We use the cutoff generally 30 as obesity, over 25 as overweight. So, generally, if the BMI is above 30, even if there's more muscle and stuff, most of the time, health would be improved by some weight loss. So I think it can be a helpful number. But, repeatedly, studies have shown that statistically significant improvements in health related to cholesterol, diabetes, high blood pressure are achieved with weight loss in around the 5 to 10% range, which is pretty attainable and achievable for a lot of people. And so it's maybe less important to just focus on BMI and more on achieving a sustainable, meaningful weight loss.
Great, thank you. And so this next question is actually for both of you. And Karen, I'll start with you. What advice do you have about setting weight loss goals to get you started?
I would, breaking it into the more achievable chunks of like the percentage weight loss is definitely easier. So, like if you're 200 pounds and 5 to 10% loss, that's only looking at, 10, 20 pounds. That's a lot easier than trying to kind of maybe get to like that quote unquote ideal weight that they have. I would definitely be flexible, probably wanting to, be your weight of maybe 30 years ago or something like that, maybe isn't the most feasible thing. And you kind of want to wait and see how it goes, see how your body reacts, see how how you feel and stuff. But, you want to be a little flexible and kind with yourself and kind of break it up into different chunks and consider other markers for achievements too, like looking at your lipids, looking at your blood sugar level. Maybe it's clothing size. Check your your waist circumference. Like that is a bigger predictor of developing type 2 diabetes than BMI, even again with that visceral fat. So you want to look at that. And so that could be, one thing that you might want to measure as well as like a physical goal. Play it up.
Dr. Feely, do you have anything to add to that about setting goals?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is that I think in our culture, we kind of have a diet mentality, but weight management is really a long-term process, and it's more important to build long-term habits and lifestyle changes than just kind of achieve these maximal results in a short period of time and go back to the old thing. So
yeah, no, that's really definitely a wonderful thing to promote here. There's a follow-up question in the chat in terms of waist circumference. I'm assuming there are resources that people can look at to see what's an appropriate waist circumference they can look to.
Our goal then, if you're going kind of around the top of the hip bone, like around your belly button, don't suck in, don't, kind of do it. It's okay. But the goal for men is to be less than 40 inches and for women less than 35 inches. So,
okay, just using a regular old tape measure.
And if you don't have a tape measure, you can take a piece of string or something, do it, and then, line that up against like a ruler, or something like that if you need.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. And just one more question before we get into some of the like logistical, like nuts and bolts of how we can help people get started here. And what are some, Dr. Feely, some common medical reasons that people struggle with weight loss?
Yeah, sure. There's a lot of reasons people can struggle with their weight. Of course, genetic factors that may contribute, but actually developing obesity in childhood and even maternal weight and diet during pregnancy can affect a predisposition for obesity during adulthood. So there are a lot of factors that really aren't entirely under our control. But most of the medical reasons I see are often related to medications people may be on, hormonal imbalances such as thyroid hormone, arthritis or injuries that affect mobility. That's kind of the burning of calories, depression, major stressors, and factors that influence sleep patterns all can play a huge role in weight. I think I saw a question pop up briefly about microbiome. There are other factors like microbiome, which is gut bacteria, and endocrine disruptors like things in plastics that sort of growing evidence about their effects on weight. We're somewhat early in that understanding, but there are other factors as well.
Would you recommend starting on like a probiotic or Karen, a larger intake of probiotic and prebiotic foods in order to, based on what the research is saying?
I definitely love the idea then of having more like fermentable kind of foods, and probiotics is good. I think most people, as long as you aren't in like an immune compromised state, or if you have like a heart valve replacement and stuff, there's some risk, technically maybe for some probiotics. I think you can generally get away with, if you want to do one without much harm. Don't know how much good, because the research is unbelievable with it, but every time I go to a conference, the end thing they say is, but we're not exactly sure yet what strains help what people in what conditions. So if you want to cover yourself, if people ask, I say get one with a whole bunch of different strains and get a lot of them, and maybe get them in the refrigerated area, maybe because these are like kind of live bacteria and it might be a little less processed and more active. But until we can, better fine tune that. And I think that will be a huge thing that will come up in the next few decades, but it's just not specialized like that yet.
Yeah, good advice. Thank you. And Karen, I'm going to stick with you because I have a lot of questions coming about food. Of course, I'm going to talk a lot about food this time. What foods affect our blood sugar? Like, help us. What should we eat?
It's mainly the carbohydrates. The fat and the protein, not much. Maybe like 10% of fat is like, it can get metabolized into glucose. Protein and fat do affect how your blood sugar spikes, in the fact that they slow down digestion and absorption of it. So if you're eating like a piece of white bread, or a piece of white bread with peanut butter, your blood sugar should not go as high if you have that fat and that protein from the peanut butter with it. And so in that way they kind of help, but it's really the carbohydrate that we're looking at, and you want to look at the quantity and the quality of it. Mostly if you have to pick one, probably the quantity more, and because it also matters then also about how much insulin you have available to you, and how responsive your body is to it. And so when you're talking about carbohydrates, we're talking about pastas, breads, waffles, all that kind of stuff. The sugars in this, doesn't matter if it's like honey or if it's table sugar, or all your desserts, fruits, your yogurt, milk, and then your non-starchy vegetables like potatoes and corn, peas, and also your legumes and beans. So, I hope for most people that, rings true, that obviously this doesn't mean these are bad foods. Some of these are extremely healthy and wonderful for us, but we want to focus on the foods that are less refined, because when they are processed and refined, we're losing fiber, we're losing fat soluble vitamins, we're losing like some fat with it. And again, with fat and protein and fiber, they help slow down how fast your blood sugar goes up. So we want those to be included there. So, you want to have your non-starchy, you just have some non-starchy vegetables. Certainly the beans and the legumes are phenomenal. We want fiber. That's a big thing that is a carbohydrate. It's not digested. There's two main types that we talk about, the soluble and the insoluble. The insoluble is going to help more maybe with like GI function. The soluble can help with bring down your cholesterol, with blood glucose control. They both get fermented in your gut, and then those short chain fatty acids have good effects with insulin sensitivity and whatnot. So these are all good things, and it helps again with your microbiome. So we want fiber, and so that's going to be in your whole grains, which is tricky sometimes. So you want to look at that food ingredient label, and you want it to say whole grain or whole wheat as like the first ingredient, or look for a little stamp on the front there. They like to try and trick you with like brown packaging and say it's 100% wheat, but it doesn't mean it's whole grain or whole wheat. But I want you to have fruits and vegetables, and just tons and tons of vegetables. One other thing is like resistant starch. So it acts more like a fiber in the sense that it can't be digested. And it also gets broken down into the short chain fatty acids. So you can find that in some like oats or barley, again, your legumes, your green like bananas versus your more ripe bananas. And then also with some foods, which is interesting, that if you cook and then you let it cool for like 24 hours, like pasta or potatoes, it increases the amount of resistant starch, which again is going to help reduce that blood sugar effect. It's not going to like spike as high because it's going to act like the fibers kind of in that sense. And then we definitely want to be reducing all the added sugars. So now on the food label, they separate it out, your total sugars and your added sugars. And the added sugars is what I really would focus and looking at. So we know, I mean, I won't bore, I think everyone probably knows that, you know, what added sugars can kind of do, you know, with the weight and with the insulin and other hormones that adds again to your abdominal visceral fat. So we want to kind of bring that down. So all of that, the fiber, making sure you're getting a lot of that with your fruits and veggies. But they are going to affect it, but just to different extents.
That's great. And just to clarify, because I think you said this, there was a question in chat asking about pairing proteins and carbohydrate foods. Like that's definitely something you would recommend, or healthier fat choice pairing with a carbohydrate food.
Fats and protein and fiber, they slow down how quickly the food kind of, some of it just even how quickly it goes from your stomach into your small intestine, but then also how quickly, it gets absorbed. And by doing that, instead of having that big spike, you can have something that goes like a little more like that, which is going to help. It'll make you feel full longer, which is going to help you have breaks in between your meals and snacks, which is good. But then it's also going to help not get those spikes. And we really don't want those spikes because we're trying to get something a little more steady.
Excellent. Thank you. So I think I'm just going to launch this poll here for everybody just to see how much they learned from you just now. What food is least likely to raise your blood sugar? Would it be peas, popcorn, honey, or a cheese stick? Let's see how much everybody was paying attention to Karen. A little fun game here. Let's see. Which food is least likely to raise your blood sugar? All right, Karen, I'm giving everybody just a second to answer, see what they say. All right, let's see, everybody. All right, Karen, so our audience, the majority says cheese stick, but we had a good majority saying peas and popcorn too. What's the answer?
It is cheese stick, but I will say popcorn, at least it would be a whole grain, and it would have that fiber. So that, and the peas, that is though a starchy vegetable. So while, I know a lot of doesn't mean it doesn't have its place, but we do consider that a carbohydrate. So that cheese stick, that's just like a protein, would have the least effect.
Excellent. All right, so there's one more quiz question here that Karen's going to answer before we move on to some other ideas. How can you reduce the effect of eating pasta on your blood sugar? And I like this. This fits into my wheelhouse, Karen, of the culinary recommendations. Prepare with olive oil and garlic, choose 100% whole grain pasta, eat cold pasta salad prepared the day before, or all of the above. Let's see what everybody says. Everyone a second just to answer. We're all over the map with the answers here. This will be a fun one for you to respond to. All right. Okay, so the majority say choose 100% whole grain. What's the answer?
It is all of the above. I mean, they look to different degrees. So, that first one with the olive oil, that fat might help kind of maybe not have it like spike as much as if you were just going to have it plain or just with like tomato sauce. The whole grain is going to be better than maybe the white. And, having the, cooking it and cooling it for like that 24 hours and eating it cold is going to have that increase in the resistant starch. The same time, none of these are, to say, or at least like A and C, to say have as much like white pasta as you want, as long as there's oil or it's cold, or because again, we want to look at the quality of it and the quantity of it and how much you're having. But these are little things that if somebody wants to, that you can kind of, do to help, but definitely we want to be looking at like certain the portions with it too.
Excellent. So we talked a little bit about the lifestyle changes, having what effects they have, that you're recommending for blood sugar control. But Karen, what are your recommendations for like the planning here, like the healthy meal planning and snack options to really help people get started?
So if it comes to, I would say with the lifestyle though, and again, I would want to just really stress the exercise part of it again to help.
Sure. Yeah.
Because I think that gets overlooked a lot. When you do exercise, especially if you do have like type 2 diabetes, it helps increase like your glucose uptake in your muscles by contracting it, even if you don't have insulin or on board or enough. So it goes through kind of like an insulin independent pathway. So you can bring someone with type 2 diabetes, you can start to bring their ability of glucose uptake during that exercise period and for a little bit afterwards to similar to someone who doesn't have diabetes. So it is extremely important. You get the benefits of it for, for a solid 2 hours after, and some of it even for like another day or so afterwards. Again, with or without, weight loss, it can help to reduce your incidence of type 2 and help better manage your blood sugars. The cardio and the strength training, they both have separate, they both help kind of in different ways, but we know that putting them together helps the best. So I just would definitely emphasize a lot of that. And, the lifestyle, like Dr. Feely mentioned before, this, stress and sleep and how that all kind of plays into it. I think that gets honestly overlooked a lot as well. And it's kind of hard to get that on track if you could get everything else on track if those aren't there, because your hormones are just a little out of whack there. But when it comes to actually the meal planning and the snack, we talked about kind of the carbohydrates and what to look at. I do always fall back to Michael Pollan, I can never say it, the eat food, not too much, mostly plants. It is the simplest, easiest way to kind of go about. It doesn't mean it has to be all plants, but I would like to see people start to think about vegetables not as the side, but as the star of your meal. So the question is, what am I having for dinner is what vegetable am I eating? And then what am I having on the side? What's my protein on the side, or maybe my carbohydrate on the side? We want it to be like half of your plate of these non-starchy vegetables. And I would like to see it with your lunch and with your dinner and stuff. You can do no wrong by adding more in that way. You want to look at the quality of your fats. Certainly, we want more unsaturated fats, the monounsaturated and the polyunsaturated fats. We want the omega-3s. These all are going to help as well. We want to reduce this, obviously that saturated fat that we talked about. And as far as like any specific like diet or plan, you don't have to adhere to anyone. It's not even, one is not specifically recommended by the American Dietetic Association or Diabetes Association, but we just want an emphasis on whole foods, the right fats, the right carbohydrates in the right amounts, and just kind of pairing the carbohydrates and your protein and fats together.
There was a question in the chat that came through about like small meals throughout the day versus, timing. Do you have any recommendations about that?
You don't need I think there was the theory of like eating small frequent meals all day helps like keep your metabolism up. And I don't think the studies are really showing that. If anything, you want to have like a break if you can, to kind of help get like your insulin levels and stuff back to kind of baseline in between is more helpful. So I would opt for more of those like 3 meals if you can, and if you need a snack to go in. But if you're somebody who's always been a grazer, then I'd rather work with you on figuring out what's the best way we can make 3, a couple of small good meals, and we go from there. So some of it's going to be kind of independent on the person. Yeah.
Personal. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So we can't have a program talking about weight loss without talking about fad dieting. So Dr. Keely, or Dr. Feely, what popular trends like intermittent fasting, volumetrics, keto, what are your thoughts on that? Do you recommend any of them? What's the deal with them?
Sure. Well, as I said before, I do recommend, focusing on the longer term lifestyle changes and everything above, a temporary intense diet, but it can be helpful sometimes to have a period of time where you're doing something intensive, as long as you have a plan in place for something more sustainable afterwards. But yeah, those are that you listed are some of the popular diet trends these days. The ketogenic diet is a very popular diet trend right now. It's sort of the modern low carbohydrate diet, and it's actually quite strict on that carbohydrates compared to a lot of others, because the goal is to establish this state of ketosis in which your body is fueled pretty much entirely by fat. So contrary to popular belief in how people sometimes do it, it's not actually supposed to be a high protein diet either. At most moderate, because protein actually also stimulates insulin to a lesser extent than carbohydrates, but they do. So it can disrupt the diet if you have a high protein diet. But basically the theoretical basis for it is that you're just totally minimizing insulin release because you are not having almost any carbohydrate or too much protein. And in this process, when you get to a ketogenic state, the ketones may inhibit appetite as well. So the idea that this may also help you decrease your intake. But the main thing is that the calories in the diet are primarily obtained from fat. Volumetrics diet is sort of based, it's almost the opposite, is it's based upon the idea that really load up on foods that have a low calorie density, high nutrient density, take up a lot of room in your stomach, and so keep you full a bit longer without reaching excess calories. And intermittent fasting can actually take many forms. I think we're kind of beginning to understand a lot of the health benefits. In one sense, it can be thought of as an alternative to portion control, because instead of eating 3 or 5 or whatever number of meals throughout the day and just cutting them all in half, let's say you're actually just cutting down the amount of time, the number of meals, let's say, that you're eating, number of snacks you're having. So it is a form of calorie reduction. However, there may be some further benefits that we're kind of beginning to understand with that you can also reach ketosis through fasting, because you start to metabolize your own fat for fuel once you go through your carbohydrate stores. All of these diets can be effective for weight loss. I think our understanding of the long-term health effects and benefits of them is a little different between each one. I've incorporated some aspects of all of them into diets. I sometimes see something called like a whole food plant-based diet where and incorporate some intermittent fasting. So that would be mostly based on volumetrics of the 3 of them, the plant-based foods, because they're generally, when they're whole foods and unprocessed, generally less dense and have a lot of nutrition. But attaining some of the benefits, both of the ketogenic diet and the intermittent fasting, through some fasting and ketosis as well. So yeah.
It could be a program into itself, right?
Sure.
Karen, did you have any follow-up to that?
No, I just, if anything, I'm mostly interested to see what the research will come to say eventually about like the intermittent fasting, but also, like Dr. Feely said, there are different ways to do it, the time versus the day, and maybe we don't know exactly which one is best or for what conditions. And the time of the day you do, if you do the time restricted, you probably do it in the earlier part of the day, research is showing and whatnot. So, but all the other metabolic effects and stuff are very interesting, but we'd also want to just watch, especially if you do have diabetes, depending on the kind of medications you are, could put you at risk perhaps for having too low a blood sugar. So you just would have to kind of be looked at with that. But I think it's very interesting. But the volumetrics just kind of seems pretty good and standard and basic. Like I said, looking for those whole foods things.
Right, getting high nutrient based foods, and it's in large quantities for sure. And so, Dr. Feely, before we get into our cooking demonstration portion, just want to ask you one last question to explain what medical weight loss is and how that might be helpful to some people to help manage their weight.
Sure. So yeah, medical weight loss involves developing a supervised program for weight loss that addresses the patient's health needs, basically. This can include the use of medications that assist with weight loss if they're thought to benefit the overall health of the patient. And there's been a lot of advances in recent years in medical weight loss therapies and our understanding of older therapies and how to best use them. And there are several reasons someone might consider using medications. These include, as an alternative to surgical treatment for someone who wants less invasive treatment, or maybe they're not a good candidate for surgery. Patients who have kind of more limited mobility and other limitations to achieving weight loss through standard methods. Patients whose comorbidities, other health conditions may be directly impacted by weight loss and using the medication. I've actually taken a lot of patients off of high blood pressure medications, cholesterol medications, diabetes medications in the process of weight loss, including using a medication. So they can be useful, and but overall it has to be part of a program, and the fundamentals are always important: good, healthy diet, long-term focus, and activity.
That's interesting to say. Like, some people might, think I don't want to introduce another medication, but in fact, if you're under the supervision of a physician, then you're introducing another medication and ultimately getting rid of perhaps many other prescriptions through effective weight loss. It's a really interesting point. All right, so we'll continue the conversation while we do a little bit of cooking here. And I just want to also say that if at any point people have questions during this time while I'm cooking, we'll also continue to monitor in the chat. There were a lot of questions in the chat about menopause and weight loss, and I think that could actually be a program unto itself. But I don't know if Dr. Feely or Karen, if you had any follow-up to any of that and the connection between challenges with menopause and weight loss.
Yeah, I mean, as you know, there are many hormonal changes in menopause, of course, and some of those hormonal changes do affect this process of insulin sensitivity or insulin resistance, and ultimately can make it harder to control your blood sugar, can make it a little more challenging to manage your weight. So sometimes it's kind of just addressing things a little more strictly, or looking at them in a different way to kind of take control of your insulin resistance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And with regards, I think I saw a question asking specifically about it with like pre-diabetes, in the sense that it might, age is a risk factor for diabetes, but in that new this year, it's actually, they're going to start they suggest getting tested at 35 and older as one of your risk factors, not like 45. So that's new for this year. But so yes, menopause being like older, yes, I guess there's a little increased risk, but a lot of that has to do with the age risk factor, has to do a lot with the usual seeing weight gain come with as you age and less physical activity. And so again, with menopause, maybe with the hormonal changes, having perhaps more weight gain, and in particular with less estrogen, maybe more around, again, the abdominal area. And that affects that weight gain being the kind of the factor maybe between like menopause and like in pre-diabetes or diabetes than anything else.
Really interesting. Thank you. All right, so I'm going to demonstrate a recipe here to help get everybody started. And I like, as those of you who have seen me before in the kitchen know, I like to do a lot of makeovers of typical recipes that people enjoy. So it's football season, coming upon Super Bowl season here in America. And I thought I'd do a makeover of nachos, which is always a fun classic one. So I'm going to tilt my screen down here so everybody can see. And essentially what I've done here is I've taken ground turkey and I've cooked it all the way through. I sauteed some onions with it to brown the onions, give it some flavor. And I've crumbled the turkey here so you can see it's cooked all the way through. And turkey is a really great protein that's a little bit lower in saturated fat than using like a ground beef or something like that. And the onions are going to add a lot of flavor. I've also added some salt and some cumin and some garlic powder to season it. And you could make this as spicy as you want. So you could add some chili powder to it. You could omit it completely if you don't really like spice. But this is the base here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some pure tomato paste. There's nothing in tomato. Oops, of course I spilled it. There we go. Some pure tomato paste. It's just basically concentrated tomatoes. Tomato paste is a really nice way to flavor some of your foods without adding a lot of calories, but also adding a lot of nutrition, a lot of vitamin C, a lot of lycopene, which is a great antioxidant. And I'm going to add some low sodium chicken broth. You could also use some vegetable broth as well. There needs to be a little bit more moisture added back into it with the turkey. Beef has a lot of saturated fat into it, which fat is moisture and it's also flavor. So you need to provide that back in a more helpful way. So I'm using low sodium chicken broth, and that's a really great option to add some depth of flavor to your recipes without adding a lot of calories. And again, not a lot of sodium, a lot of salt, because you are controlling it. I would rather be in charge of how much salt goes into my food for health reasons, for protecting your heart, for hydration, protecting your kidneys, rather than having the food manufacturer do that for me. So I always buy unsweetened, low sodium versions of things. And you're just going to give that a quick turnaround. You can see how quickly it kind of turns into a sauce through the concentrated tomato paste, which I like the tubed version, by the way. It's really easy to add. to your cooking very easily. So I highly recommend the tube to have in your refrigerator door. And then I've added some chicken broth, and you see how it's turned kind of into a sauce to moisturize that. And then I'm going to add some beans, some black beans. To Karen's point, we want to have lots of fiber in our diets. You also could do this just with black beans. You could do this as a completely vegan or plant-forward based recipe without doing it with meat entirely. You could definitely do these nachos that way. This recipe does have cheese, so it wouldn't entirely be vegan, but when you're preparing it the way that I'm going to show you, but you could omit the meat completely and make it vegetarian. So just give that kind of a quick turnaround in the pan. I love this recipe also because it's a very quick weeknight meal, which makes it really simple for us busy people, which we all are these days. To not burn myself, I'm going to move my hot plate away from the camera. Go. Okay. And I'm going to take my lined baking tray that I've lined here with some parchment paper, and I have sprayed with non-stick spray. Karen, am I making you hungry?
I know, I'm looking at this, I know.
And I took mini bell peppers here, which I've cut in half and I've de-seeded. Peppers are a wonderful source of vitamin C. They're actually 3 times as much vitamin C as an orange. So it's a great choice to have in the winter to keep us all healthy right now, which we all need to have. And I'm going to take a spoon and I'm going to try to fill the inside of my peppers here. It's not going to be perfect, and that's completely fine. It might even be something that you throw on top like that. But essentially what I'm doing here is using the peppers in lieu of a chip. So instead of a traditional taco recipe, or sorry, nacho recipe, which would have a chip as the base, it's going to add a lot of, processed carbohydrates, a lot of salt, a lot more calories. I've replaced it with peppers to give that as the option. And I think these are just super cute for dinner, for an appetizer based meal, for the Super Bowl, for whatever floats your boat here. And even my kids, what'd you say?
It's like a stuffed pepper, but like smaller version. Like a
exactly
version. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's really fun. Even my kids like it. So I'm going to take some cheese. You can use whatever cheese you want, and you want to limit the cheese. We do not want to have tons and tons of cheese in our diet. So this is about half a cup of and I don't use low fat cheese. I use real cheese without a lot of preservatives in it. The little bit is better than using a low fat, which is going to give you more of a faker flavor. I'd rather it be real and actually give you the satisfaction of it tasting good. So I'm using a cheddar cheese, but you could also use a Monterey Jack, you use a pepper jack, whatever you want. And I'm going to pop this into the oven for about 8 minutes. Once it's in the oven for 8 minutes, I will show you through the magic of television how that looks. So it looks like this. I just really want to get the angle in there, right? Okay. I'm going to put it on the plate for you and show you how I would plate it up. So it's super fast, super easy, delicious, and fun for everybody, and a great little appetizer here. And then I'm going to show you how you're going to get that missing crunch that you might be longing for when you say no chips. How could you not put any chips in this? I'm going to show you how to replace that. All right. So now that I've got my portion here, go. Karen, what do you think about my portion? Am I good?
I think if you're looking at veggies and stuff, it's looking good. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. It's looking good. All right. So I'm going to take a couple slices of some healthy, good fats, my avocado. I'm going to just take 3. And they're thin. They're thin slices. So I got 3 slices of some avocado there. And then here's the trick. If you're really missing some of that crunch from the chips, I took crushed chips. I took 1 handful of crushed chips. I just gave it a little sprinkle. So that way, it's basically 1 chip that you're eating, 1 to 2 chips crumpled up. to give it the flavor that you're missing and the flavor that you're longing for. And I think that's my lunch today. What do you think?
I wish I had that.
I wish I could share. I wish I could definitely share. Oh, questions in the chat here about oven temperature. It was about 400 degrees or 375, but also did the trick too. The recipe it was sent to you. If for any reason you didn't get it, you can put your name and email address in the survey, and I'm happy to send that to you. The survey will automatically pop up on your screen, excuse me, at the end of this program, and I'll be happy to get the recipes over to you. But I think this is a wonderfully nutrient-rich lunch full of vitamin C, full of fiber, full of protein, and a little bit of cheese just to give it a little bit of crunch from the chips to give it some flavor, some healthy fats. But this will definitely sustain me for a few hours, and I think it would be a great option to try as an alternative to get you started. Let me see if there are any other questions in the chat here, but we're almost out of time. Dr. Feely, what do you think? Would you eat that?
Absolutely. That looks delicious.
I saw one about tofu, and I was going to just say it's good. Eat it. I like soy in its whole form. So edamame or tofu or even like a soy milk. And I would consider it a protein. Like it's a starch. It's kind of be like a starchy kind of protein there. But if you're using that in place of other foods and stuff, I wouldn't worry so much about it. So I would definitely incorporate it if you could. And as far as like good veggies to recommend, it's that's a thing you've always heard about, like just eat the rainbow, pick a variety. The darker green ones we know have a lot of vitamins and phytonutrients in there that are really good. Those cruciferous vegetables, if you can certainly tolerate them. But if you can get I see the one comment about the soybean with GMO with Roundup, I would get the organic tofu. So you could, yes, it is one of the most highly pesticide foods. So you can get the organic to hopefully avoid with that. But as far as the vegetables, just get a variety if you can. Different colors have different nutrients and stuff in it. So having the variety is good. And for the fats, again, you want those like unsaturated, polyunsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats, the omega-3. Probably just like if you just kind of Google, most places will kind of have I know someone asked for like a list of those. So I just saw those in there.
Yeah, if you go on to especially like the American Heart Association website, there are wonderful resources there for you to print lists to help you get started. I also will just add that in our Center for Healthy Living YouTube library, I recently taught 2 recorded classes that you can watch all about plant forward and plant-based eating that was earlier this month. And in November, all about cooking for reducing your risk for diabetes. So there's even more lengthy conversation there about what foods affect your blood sugar, how to prepare them, how to cook more to the style of the way Dr. Feely and Karen talked to today. And I'll put all of those in the email that we send out to you with the recording from this presentation. So you have all these references to really get you going. But I would highly recommend, if you're interested in learning more or for your personal health, to schedule an appointment with the Center for Weight Management or our diabetes education program. All of that referral information will be in the survey. And as I said, this program was recorded, so you should receive a link to that. Please fill out the survey. It really helps us to craft better programs for the community, and we really, really value your feedback. So thank you so much for participating, Dr. Feely and Karen. I think this was a really great conversation, really informative. And I hope to see everybody back in the Zoom room soon.
Thanks. Thank you.
Take care, everyone.
You too.
Okay.